Hey, Susan, the last few weeks I've been followed online by ads for Noom. So I decided to check it out. Have you heard of Noom before?
I have.
So what caught my eye about Noom is that it's a personalized weight loss plan.
Yeah, most weight loss plans are sort of a one-size-fits-all deal, and that doesn't work when everyone leads such different, crazy, hectic lives. And I know for us, a big challenge of trying to eat right is being on the road a lot, and between airports and, me and the hotel breakfast bars.
You do love those breakfast bars.
Love those. A little too much. And that's why Noom is great. It addresses your lifestyle, your habits, and finds the issues in your life that are blocking your weight loss goals.
It feels like a personalized weight loss plan to meet everyone's lifestyle. And the best thing about it, it doesn't seem to restrict what you eat and doesn't shame you when you choose to treat yourself. Hello, Manhattans.
So if you want to get one of those hotel waffles, you're good to go. Look, you're going to have cravings. There's going to be things you want to eat. With Noom, you can. And Noom helps you lose weight while still enjoying your life.
It also looks at your personal psychology. Losing weight starts with the brain, so why not look at your brain to see what would work for you?
Stay focused on what's important to you with Noom's psychology and biology-based approach. Sign up for your trial today at Noom.com. And check out Noom's first ever cookbook, The Noom Kitchen, for 100 healthy and delicious recipes to promote better living. Available to buy now wherever books are sold.
So don't forget, sign up for your trial today at Noom.com.
That's not just the sound of that first sip of Morning Joe. It's the sound of someone shopping for a car on Carvana from the comfort of home.
That's a good blend.
It's time to take it easy, like answering some easy questions to get pre-qualified for a car in minutes.
Talk about starting the morning right.
Just like customizing your terms so your car fits your budget. Visit Carvana.com or download the app to experience car shopping the way it should be. Convenient, comfortable. Ah.
Hello and welcome to this week's Sidebar. We're here to discuss episode 14 of season 2 of Proof. And we're here recording live from a hotel gym room.
It's true. A few minutes ago, though, we were in the hotel. I was in Susan's room, and she was recording video underneath a blanket tent that we made.
We made a blanket fort to record video.
I'm sorry I wasn't invited to see that.
What happens if someone walks in here right now?
They will be scared and turn around and walk away.
So this week on the show, we heard from a few witnesses. We also heard from Jared Conway a little bit, from our one very brief phone conversation with him. I remember when it happened, Jacinda, we were both like, that's not what we expected him to sound like.
No, I'm not sure what I expected, but I don't know. You could tell from the little bit of the recording I got. He was also very angry. So his voice seemed like high pitched and angry, but he would not engage. I tried to slow down and see if he would talk, and he just hung up on me.
Yeah.
He wanted to control the flow of information, and you were disrupting that pattern for him.
We actually had one listener write in this week, though, about that conversation we had with him, or rather the letter that followed up after. Jacinda, what did that comment say?
Oh, yeah. So we did. We had someone write in who said their father, I believe, worked a lot with the prison system and inmates, and that his understanding of expiration date does not mean suicide. It means their release date. So,
but he's nowhere close to a release date.
Almost a decade away. So I still think he was trying to subtly threaten. I don't know. It's hard to say, though. Like, maybe he doesn't know. Maybe Jared doesn't know that we know when he actually is up for possible release.
I also think with this guy, you have to take into account that he's trying to control every aspect of the conversation, and everything he says is designed for drama. And I don't know if we'll ever know exactly what he meant, but it was supposed to catch your attention and get us talking about it like we are right here.
Yeah, that's true.
Yeah, so 1 point to Jared.
Yeah.
Well
done.
Well done. I also think, though, that he might underestimate who we are and what we know and how much research and time we're putting into this.
We also heard this episode from Karen Greer, that's Eric Greer's mother. And she talked about what her son was like and her last conversation with him, which, I mean, I can't imagine having that be your last phone call with your child.
Yeah, it's heartbreaking. She's like, Eric, I can't come get you, but just wait.
Half
wait
an hour.
30 minutes.
I'll come get you.
I'll come
right
get
then.
you 30 minutes. And
He couldn't wait for whatever reason. There's a lot we don't know about what happened to Eric, and there's no reason to think it's necessarily connected directly to what happened in this case, in Renee's case. But it is possible that there is a connection in the sense that whatever happened that day, Eric got in trouble because he was acting as a police informant. I've heard that from a variety of people. And also Eric himself in his letters to his mom while in jail, he talks about how he was going to go, or he already had met with Steve Harris and how he expected that would help him get out and how his mom didn't need to worry about him, wasn't dangerous. So we don't know what happened, but for whatever reason, he ends up on the highway out there and is killed. And, Eric Greer, like we said on the show, not someone I'd call credible. Like, he's not the guy that you would trust every word he says at all. But he's also not Josh Burrows. He's not someone who I could find evidence of telling just random, bizarre, scattershot lies like this. That wasn't what he did. And I still have never found a reason why he would tell this lie, especially not over and over again, like committed to it as he was. And he himself, he says straight up in his recorded statement, he doesn't know what actually happened. He just knows the things he saw and heard from others. But whatever else happened, I believe that Eric believed the things he said and that he saw the things he said he saw.
and there's no benefit to him.
None.
For coming forward. And just to remind everyone, he came forward
About 2 weeks.
about 2 weeks after Renee's body was found. At the time, there's records of him coming to the police.
Or trying to. They weren't that interested in talking to him, but he tried to talk to them.
And then it was 2 years later he records the video. So there's nothing for him to benefit. There's no reward at that point.
There's only harm, like potential harm.
The first time I heard the Eric Greer video, the first time I saw it and heard it, I thought, who does he have an axe to grind here against someone? And you all have found nothing for that. So that to me was my first thought, but there's never been anything to come to light to suggest he has an axe to grind.
They were his friends.
Yeah.
Now, despite the fact, so the timing here is that statement that you've heard in the show was recorded in 2002 after Ty Lopes' conviction, but before Jake's trial. Despite that statement is never used in court. He never testifies. The sister story is never really brought up and never brought up before the jury. And in fact, it's only mentioned one time in the transcripts that we have. And it was from prosecutor Charles Schultz, who is talking in court. They're arguing over some motions they have. And he kind of out of nowhere says, there's a person out there named Eric Greer that some people said he was acting kind of funny. And when they're talking about some young girl, he says, shut up and don't talk about that. But there's no substance behind it. Now, that's not at all what Eric Greer was saying. Like, what he's talking about seems to be what Jamie, the sister, was saying. But he's obviously aware, the prosecutor's obviously aware that Eric Greer exists, but believes there's no substance behind it.
Could this be a strategy to make sure it gets on record so that years later it can't come back as new evidence or a Brady violation or anything? Like, I better just get this on the record now.
I don't know. It's a strange thing to bring up, and it's strange that it never got more attention. But at the same time, like you and me, Jacinda, when we saw this case for the first time, the Eric Greer stuff, we're like, what is this? Like, okay, I guess we'll look at that. It seemed both kind of too crazy to be true, but also like if everyone's talking about this, surely it's been vetted. Yes, it's the sort of thing. It's like, if this was true, we would know. And since we don't know, it's probably not. Only in this case, it turns out it was never actually looked at, despite the fact that people were aware of it.
Hey, my name's Otis Gray, host of the Daily Book Club, a daily podcast where I read wonderful old books one chapter at a time. Simple as that. Whether you want to get engaged and lost in a fascinating story that has stood the test of time, or just relax to a good book, listen to the Daily Book Club to get wrapped up or unwind during your day. We'll read classic stories like Pride and Prejudice, The Enchanted April, The Wind in the Willows, beautiful stories all told from start to finish. And you can even do a real book club. Tune into the Daily Book Club Discord and discuss the readings with other book club listeners. However you want to listen, it's your choice. Subscribe to the Daily Book Club on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, and everywhere else. New episodes every single day. So sit back, relax, and get lost in the Daily Book Club.
Last year, after 12 years, a true crime case I've been following and thought never would be solved finally was. A breakthrough in the hunt for the Long Island serial killer emerged on July 14th. Architect Rex Heuermann was apprehended after being identified through DNA analysis and cell phone records. His arrest not only brought a sense of closure, but also cast an international spotlight in the case. Meanwhile, behind the scenes, the dedicated team at the Lisk podcast has been tirelessly investigating those chilling murders since 2017. Drawing from 5 years of painstaking research, including interviews with the victims' loved ones, host Chris Mass is unraveling the intricate tapestry of this case. Lisk delves into the latest developments in the case, from groundbreaking DNA revelations to the pivotal role of the victim's family in the ongoing investigation. Listen to Lisk, Long Island Serial Killer, that's spelled Lisk, to gain unparalleled insight into the decades-long murder investigation and follow the journey towards justice for the victims of the Long Island serial killer. So we had a few questions this week, and one from Deb Klein on Facebook, and she wrote, "Every time Jake's trial is discussed, I keep shouting into the void, what's his defense doing? Still waiting to hear about his attorney, and why did so much happen in court to slip by, seemingly unchecked?" And long answer short is that his attorney just wasn't really doing a lot. There's nothing particularly notable to talk about there, which is why you haven't heard much about it. She didn't do anything terrible. Like, there was no flagrant, notable moments of failure. There's nothing like that. There's just a lot she didn't do. And there is stuff she did right and stuff she was pursuing hard, I guess. And it wasn't like she was asleep at the wheel, but there definitely was a lot that just was never done. There's not really more of a story to it than that. She just didn't do it.
It's hard to know what a defense attorney's strategy is unless they sit down and explain it to you, right?
Yes, and she declined. Well, she didn't decline, but she never...
She said yes, but then that never sort of materialized.
Correct. And she did, to give credit, there were a few points that she did track down and have a good record in place. It didn't matter, but she wasn't doing nothing. Remember the two teenagers who told police that they heard Jake confess on the phone and admit to beating Renee to death? And then at trial, they said they, made it all up. She did track down all the records that proved that could have never happened because they were never out of juvie at the same time. So that was something. It wasn't like she didn't care. And when I talked to her, she remembered the case immediately. She clearly believed Jake was innocent and that this one had gotten wrong. And I kind of got the sense from her that was not a thing she said often about her cases.
It's hard it's hard to know what happened in the courtroom just from a trial transcript. Right.
Yeah. Jake says he was very frustrated with her. He felt like she was intimidated by the prosecutor, that she was never really fighting back. But that's his perception of someone who's never been in court like that before.
And he's also the one literally with his life on the line.
Mm-hmm. We also have a question from Sarah CK, who wrote, "That was a crazy episode. What was up with that woman getting scared and hanging up on you when you asked her if her story happened on a rooftop? That was freaky."
There's been a couple comments from listeners about the rooftop and the hang-up phone call.
Yeah, so if you remember Karen Greer, Eric's mother, when I talked to her, she says the first time she heard about this case, or in connection with Eric anyway, is when Eric had spent a night hanging out on a rooftop somewhere and then came home early morning hours, just hysterical, high, upset, couldn't really say much till he went to bed and they talked the next day. And I knew about the rooftop thing from that and other sources. And when I mentioned it to this witness, and this has happened a few times in this case, and I've learned to keep my mouth shut. Once the people I'm talking to learn I already know something about it, that tends to freak them out more than anything. Some people have been comfortable talking about it till they realize I'm already aware of things, and that's their cutoff point. I don't know why she got uncomfortable. There's nothing to suggest she was heading to hide about the case itself. But yeah, she clearly had gotten a little bit spooked and didn't want to talk anymore. Now, as for what happened on the rooftop, we have heard a lot of stories in this case and a lot of stories of the sister story. We can't always verify the details. Often the details are wrong. So it's not always stuff worth airing on the show. In this case, the rooftop conversation, the rooftop night happened sometime in the week after Renee's body was found. So after Eric went to the house on Pastana Avenue and everyone there was acting weird. And It seems like what was happening is that on this particular night, no one on the rooftop was actually involved on the night when whatever happened. None of them were there. But they are all aware of something happening, and they're all kind of accusing one another or trying to figure out what happened. And they're sort of going around saying, well, you must have done it. No, you must have done it. But it doesn't seem like any of them actually knew who done it. But the conversation did leave Eric very upset. And clearly they all felt very strongly about what was happening. I don't think anyone in that conversation, though, had actual answers.
Yeah, and so when people find out that we know about these conversations that have taken place, you can understand why someone might get a little freaked out.
Yeah.
In your mind, do you think it confirms that conversation happened on the rooftop? I mean, we've talked to
that
people.
One. Well, we already know that one happened from a lot of sources. So again, when you first hear about it, you're like, oh, what's happening on this rooftop? What's important? And I guess my conclusion at this point is that no one in that particular group actually knew enough to know, but they're also freaked out by what they do know, that they're just kind of accusing each other and everyone's getting worked up over it.
But the bigger picture is what it means is that a little over a week after Renee's body is found, there are people in Manteca who think they know what happened.
Yeah. We also have a question from Mandy Mans on Instagram, who actually commented on episode 13 when we first talked to Tim Fisher. And she asked, interested in knowing whether Renee's friends have corroborated Tim's version of how they were known to each other. Just seems so weird that he was friends with the mother on Facebook and made himself the hero in the story by her getting drunk, etc. As you heard on the most recent episode 14, yes, Renee's friends did confirm that she and Tim knew each other. Amber was the main person in that group who also hung out with Tim. A few of the others knew of Tim as well, though most of them didn't actually have any dealings with him. But yeah, for Amber and Renee, it was not an uncommon thing for them to drive around town with Tim and his little Datsun and, smoking weed and buying alcohol and cigarettes.
And she also said, though, that Tim never did anything that she felt was inappropriate with her. She never made advances or anything like that. And she didn't know about other people.
Yeah, and she kind of admitted that they were pretty naive. And she seemed really surprised when she found out how much older than he was, like nearly, not quite a decade, but getting up there. So yeah, that part's true. They were friends in that sense. They did know each other. They did hang out. And as Amber said, Renee would immediately get into a car with him if she wanted to ride somewhere. Yeah, and another thing Amber told us about that we didn't include in the show, we were telling her about the story Tim told us about the time that Renee had gotten drunk in a place they call the Forest, and he'd had to help carry her out because she couldn't walk, and she peed on his arm. And it was a whole thing. And Amber's response was, oh, she did that to Nick McGran Mason too, which is the guy the ex-boyfriend of Renee that Tim says was also there. And we're like, wait, where'd this happen? And we quickly realize it's the same story. And what's interesting is that Amber says she does not remember Tim being there and definitely does not recall him carrying Renee away. She had a very clear memory of Nick was the one who had to carry her out of the field. We don't know why their memories differ. And Amber even said, she's like, I can't say he wasn't there. I just don't recall him being there. But it was interesting to us that the story that has, as the question said, has Tim being the hero in it, Amber had no memory of that part.
But like you said, Amber said he could have very well have been there and I just don't remember it.
Yeah. Or he could have been watching from afar and saw this happen and, retelling the story, inserted himself in the hero's role, which would not be uncommon. That's a thing people do often enough.
Unfortunately, we can't reach out to Nick to get his perspective, which could be an entirely third kind of memory because he died. So it's Amber's memory versus Tim's.
People remember things very differently when you're talking decades on.
Mm-hmm.
And doesn't mean they're lying. They just remember them differently.
Yeah, exactly.
Definitely have that experience with the bitch killer witnesses, which is what we refer to them as. It's the ones who Tim told us about first, actually, who had confronted him about rumors that he'd been seen with Renee before she died. And Tim told us a story about how, they all three together had basically jumped him. We're going to beat him up. But then a magical crowbar appeared and he's able to fend them off. And I remember thinking at the time, I'm like, this story doesn't sound very real. And then I talked to a couple of people involved and they're like, no, that didn't happen at all here. Like what happened is people were accusing him. People were saying he was seen with her. I confronted him. We didn't even fight. And then finally I find one of the people involved and he's like, oh yeah, Tim came back with a crowbar. I'm like, okay, so the crowbar thing is true. Circumstances sound different. I don't know whose version is the most correct, if it's Tim's or if it's Ernie's, but like...
It almost seems like two merged memories.
Yeah.
But some incident involving a crowbar and Tim defending himself against accusations seems like it did happen.
Yeah. And unfortunately, the people that I spoke to in that neighborhood, they don't recall who told them a lot of what they heard back then. Or they say they don't recall who told them what they heard back then.
Yeah.
But they were very adamant. They're like, yeah, everyone there, it was like, he was just seen with Renee right before she died. And I'm like, well, who saw them there?
And now almost 24 years later, they can't remember.
Yeah.
Which is unfortunate.
But what we do know is that Jenny, she called the cops. She talked to the cops. She reported what she knew. She told us, for instance, she explained that like, she thought she knew that Tim hated women because she thought that Tim played pool sometimes at Ernie's sister's house. And she thinks now that they remember him making comments about women that showed he was misogynist from that. And then she remembers hearing people talk about, you know, him and Renee being seen together. And she thought she heard a story about him being jealous of her or something. But this far on, she doesn't recall that who was saying it. But she says she would have known for sure back then. If the police had ever called her back, she would have told them right away. So if she did know someone who saw Renee and Tim together, she could have told them the name right then, and they never called her.
The other thing about her story, though, it doesn't seem like she didn't see them together herself.
She did not. She is certain she did not see them.
So
she'd seen Tim, interacted with him. She knew something about him, like the thing about him hating women. She thinks she heard him talking at playing pool. But she knows she didn't see Renee and Tim together.
It's another example of the rumor mill in Manteca.
Yep,
yeah.
Exactly.
But it's also interesting to note, though, that these two rumors, like the bitch killer rumors, that is entirely separate from the sister story. These people don't know one another. They're not aware of it. The people who know the rumors from the street level court, they were almost entirely, I think almost all of them, unaware of what was being said about the sister story. They hadn't heard any of that. They'd heard a separate set of talk that was just about Tim and nothing to do with the house on Pastana Avenue.
So two separate circles.
Two separate sets of rumors. And Tim's the only overlapping point.
Also, by the way, I would be very happy if I never have to say bitch killer again. That it felt like the episode you made a point of making sure.
Oh, did I do that?
I said bitch killer.
I asked her to. I messaged her and Simon separately.
Did you? Thank you.
Make sure just
thank you for that. I probably said it about 12 times in the episode.
It's actually bitch killer. So
yeah, well,
I do remember though, Jacinda, we were in the car together driving somewhere, and I was looking up. You were driving. I was looking for the lyrics of the song we just heard about, and I remember reading them. And I didn't imagine it was that bad.
Yeah, I think we were actually driving back to the airport.
Yeah.
And you were reading the lyrics out loud. And I too was like, what? Like, this is pretty bad. So.
And just, I mean, I don't know what Tim's thought process was, but like to put that on your skateboard after your friend was murdered while possibly walking alone somewhere definitely seemed incongruent with the caring friend he tried to position himself as.
Yeah, but I think Ernie says it best, where he's like, I'm not going to beat someone up over a sticker on a skateboard.
It was actually Chris.
Oh, it was Chris who said that?
Because Ernie did beat someone.
That's true. I got them mixed up.
Yeah, no, Chris was like, I don't care what's on a skateboard. Ernie was like, oh, I saw that and it was on.
I don't know. I mean, it's one of those things like, so he's got a sticker on his skateboard. Like, does that prove anything? No. Was it a bad choice? Probably.
So next week, we return to Manteca again and attempt to talk to Tim Fisher for a second time after learning more about him and the case and the sister's house in general, and find out what he'll say when we can ask better questions.
Now we're ready to meet with him and actually ask him about things that we've learned that we didn't know the first time we talked to him.
So come back next week for episode 15, which will also be the third to last episode in our series.
You've been listening to Proof, Sidebar, a podcast by Red Marble Media in association with Glassbox Media. Send us your questions and comments at proofcrimepod@gmail.com. Follow us everywhere with the handle @proofcrimepod and on our website, proofcrimepod.com. Regular episodes drop on Mondays, and you can find sidebars on Thursdays. Thanks so much for listening.